Great, that's us live. Hello and welcome. I am Dr. Claire from Cognitive Sports Therapy, and I am really, really pleased tonight to bring Nicola Ostler back into the room. Nicola, you don't need much of an introduction in this forum. You are one of the founding members of Cognitive Sports Therapy, and you are a fitness coach. And tonight we are here to talk about ADHD. Just to frame that, we are knowing that ADHD, I think, is a higher prevalence than we used to think. It used to be really labelled as a childhood diagnosis, but of course, what happens to all those children when they hit adulthood, those symptoms just don't disappear. And I think NICE kind of sits there and says our prevalence in adulthood is sitting at about 5%, a little bit lower than the sort of 6 or 7% in children. We can have a conversation about that. I think they think that about 65, possibly more percent of people who have it in childhood carry it through into adulthood. But again, we can talk about that. And I think we think a lot in adults in particular that it gets misdiagnosed and diagnosed. A lot of people are carrying a diagnosis of anxiety or addictive behaviours into adulthood and have missed that recognition moment, I guess, of having a diagnosis of ADHD. But Nicola contacted me, didn't you, Nicola? And have been kind of quite active on social media because recently you were diagnosed. And I'd love you to just share a little bit about your journey and how you've got to where we are today.
Of course, absolutely. So it's been quite a whirlwind in a way. I have always felt a little bit different to my peers and a little bit different to my family in the way I thought about things, what I did for fun, all sorts of different ways that we can come into. But the main reason why it came to my attention is because one of my children was finding certain things difficult, and some behaviours that you think children perhaps grow out of as they get older, they hadn't kind of grown out of them, and we were thinking perhaps there was something a bit more going on. And this particular child has always been very much like me as a child and as a grown-up, and I could always relate to them and found myself kind of explaining the behaviours to my husband and perhaps the siblings, saying, you know, they can't help it. It's literally a reaction. It's not a choice of behaviour. And I felt like I was the one who could calm them and understand and talk them down from wherever they were. So there's a real connection between me and this particular child. So I started looking at their behaviour in more detail, as you do, research, good old Google. And then that just starts you on a track, and it started to suggest that it could be ADHD. So then I started looking at ADHD in women because it seemed to be a natural progression. Yeah. And there are many online assessments that you can do. And I did many of them and found that I could tick pretty much every box. And then I was like, but people self-diagnose all the time. It's ridiculous. It's not what people typically think of what ADHD is. I don't know about you, but when we thought about it in school, and even when I was a teacher, it was the hyperactive boy who couldn't sit still, who's always out of his chair, fiddling things, tapping on things, running around. There was really never any association with girls at school. Yeah. And it was the hyperactivity that was a real trait, probably the biggest characteristic. So just the fact that I could have it, or one of my children could have it, who doesn't display hyperactivity particularly, was mind-blowing. So then I thought, if my child does have it, then they're going to need support and help in the school. Yeah. So it's easier, interestingly, as an adult to get diagnosed than it is for a child, depending on what you want to get out of that diagnosis. So one of the questions I was asked is, why did you want to get diagnosed? So I wanted to get diagnosed because if I had it, then I would know pretty much that that's what my child also had, and then I could pursue it. So I didn't want to self-diagnose and just go down the route of ticking off the online assessments. I wanted to see somebody, and I took a recommendation from a psychologist friend who put me in touch with a psychotherapist who specialises in working with autistic and ADHD people. And he was actually able to see me really quite quickly. And I declined the written assessments because I felt like the written assessments I'd done were just too clear cut. I wanted the interview. I wanted to speak about how I'd been as a child, what I found difficult, what I find easy, my characteristics, because I also thought I wanted to rule out anything else it could be. So I have always thought I was different. I've always wanted to have therapy to try and work out why my brain works like it does. And I wanted to rule out any kind of trauma that had happened to me I didn't really know about or wasn't aware of. I wanted to rule out autism. I wanted to know. And by the end of the interview, it was, I mean, he almost forgot to tell me. It was so obvious. He just started referring to me as neurodivergent in the conversation. And I was like, oh, so I am? And he's like, without a shadow of a doubt. So for me, it was fantastic news. I was so pleased. And I came home and I ran into the house like, yay, I got ADHD, guys. And we were on the house screaming, yay. It makes sense. It makes so much sense. And then we kind of joked, and you probably have it too. But it's always kept it a really positive, vibey, yes, we're a bit different, but, you know, different, special, right? If everyone was the same, it'd be boring. So I've always kept it on that kind of positive vibe. Kind of lost my track of thought now where this question started. So remind me, Claire.
Yeah, no, we were just talking about just generally your journey. And I think the kind of key thing in this, I think that is slightly surprising me and something that I hope other people can maybe have the same experience is that how swiftly it all happened for you. Because I think in my experience where I sit, particularly post-pandemic, I have people who are questioning, and if they are maybe don't have that psychologist friend, they're going around going, how do I get an assessment? They try and get into the GP, which might take ages in itself. And then they're told there's about a 3-year waiting list to get a diagnosis. So I think the key thing, actually, what you said in the way through was, and you said to me before we came on air, that none of this was ever for you about getting medication. And I wonder, because the getting the medication involves having to go and sit in a room with a psychiatrist to get that medication. And actually, there are probably quite a lot of people like yourself who feel different, but are functioning. They've kind of, as an adult, you've created, and we talked again about your choices of career as you've gone through and how you manage yourself by being active, and your lifestyle choices have kind of helped this to impact less on you than maybe it would do for somebody else. I mean, do you think that's were you always quite clear that you didn't want medication and it was more just about understanding?
No, when I first went, I thought, you know, I don't need a medication, so I don't need to see a psychiatrist. I don't need to go through the doctor route. I want to go through the therapy route. But having had postnatal depression, I know how effective and how important antidepressants were for me. So I wouldn't rule it out. There's just so much to say. So that's exactly it. I didn't need medication at that time. My life is good. I manage my symptoms well. I have a really supportive family that I've created by myself. Like my children and my husband are very tolerant of the behaviours that can be problematic. And I'm talking about, okay, just 2 examples today. On the way back from the school run, I was like, oh gosh, what's that? It was a duster that had fallen out of the window when I was dusting 2 days ago. I was shaking it out of the window 2 days ago, and I dropped it. I was like, oh, that's annoying. But I completely forgot about it. So most people perhaps would have gone straight down and got it, or next time they went out, I was like, oh yes, I must pick up that duster. I'd completely forgotten it was there. So that's one. The other thing is end of year tax returns. Okay, it's due like in like 4 days' time. Haven't done it. So it's the constant reminders, the inability to do anything before the absolute deadline, zoning out when things are being described to me, saying to me that I'm not really that interested in, like the game Risk. Board games that I'm just not that interested in. My children are like, mummy, as they see me zone out. So tolerant family members and friends is a key thing. But if I was in a job that I loved and it was interfering with that job, all those kind of things, forgetfulness, tight deadlines, zoning out, then I would absolutely consider taking medication. what I have realised I have done in my life is I've chosen careers that allow me to be quite autonomous, creative, think short term. I'm always planning a day ahead. I don't have to have big goals and long-term plans. And so even with teaching, you do have to have a curriculum. So a framework is really important to me, and structure, but I have to be free within that structure and that framework to be creative and autonomous. So teaching was brilliant. It was all short-term deadlines. Being self-employed and creating your own business, all of the things about that ADHD give you. It's the entrepreneurial spirit, it's the creativity, it's the autonomousness of it. So I haven't needed medication, but like you say, therapy wise, exercise is suggested as one of the things that both children and adults do to help manage their symptoms. And obviously I've self-medicated with that for as long as I remember. It's a need I have. It's literally a need. I have to move my body. And the same with being outside. And friends tease me over the years about what I'd be like. I'd have to be outside. I'd have to have the seat by the window. I'm just drawn to nature, drawn to the outdoors. And again, that is a therapy that's suggested for ADHD. It has been suggested that the ADHD brain is closer to the caveman brain. So it's fight or flight mode. It's reacting to crisis situations well. It's movement, it's nature. It's a brain that's not designed to sit in a classroom or in an office and just be the same as everybody else and toe the line and have long-term goals and ambition. All the things I questioned about myself growing up. It's like, why don't I have goals? What are my goals? It's like, why didn't I ever think about getting married or what job I was going to do or where I was going to live? It's like, I've always lived in the moment. And I have found it hard to understand other people who are in careers that not particularly happy in, but they're always looking for the next step, and that next step makes them happy. Like, what? But you're not enjoying what you're doing now. Why are you doing it? I found it really hard to comprehend that. So interestingly, a lot of the advice we give at cognitive sports therapy is stuff that is just, I cannot argue with. I just have to do it. Other people, I think, have the same needs. They push it aside because of what society has always expected us to be. Getting very philosophical now. Shall we bring it back?
Well, I wonder, there is a thing that whenever you have that kind of, if your brain works in that particular way, if you try and contain it, as you say, within a kind of a office environment or something that's very regulated and with no room for creativity, I guess, then no wonder then people start to feel very anxious. It's like a bit like being trapped, I guess, isn't it? Feel anxious, need to use substances to kind of help dampen down that those anxious feelings and that kind of need to kind of escape, I guess, a little bit.
I think it's very much kept in a box that you just don't fit. And because everybody else is doing it, you feel like you should be. But actually there's so many options. And that's why I think as a parent with a child that you suspect has got ADHD, like talking now about it, and it's only just come up for you as a parent, the key thing is to support them in their differences and help them understand that environment they're in perhaps it isn't the best for them, and how can we help you manage it. And so going back to diagnoses and why get diagnosed. So the psychotherapist that I saw said that you don't necessarily need your child to have a diagnosis. He said this to me because he said, like you did, it's a 3-year waiting list on the NHS for both adults and children. So if you've got a child in year 9 who you suspect, they've got GCSEs in a couple of years. And they're going to be finding it harder than other children. Okay. So what I would say to those parents is research the hell out of what ADHD is. Okay. It's inattentiveness. It's an inability to focus. Is your child told off for daydreaming? Do they find it hard to get their homework done on time? Do they leave their house in an absolute flap because they've forgotten to do a homework? Or do you get a call from school saying somebody's forgotten their PE kit? It's disorganization. It's what they call executive functioning. which I'd never heard of it before this, really.
Why would you?
Like you find people, help them get a schedule, perhaps put a crate by the front door with all their stuff in it so they know where it is. I think one of the things is that you're a bit of a whirlwind. Your stuff is everywhere all of the time. So if your child is really, really messy, how can you help them contain themselves a little bit and have some more order so that they feel more in control of where their stuff is? I'm incredibly messy, but I've used lots of strategies to help me be organised. I've had people tell me throughout my life, gosh, you're so organised. I'm like, but things are important, like my job and getting the kids organised. I am, but ask Rob about groceries and lawn, house cleaning and dentist appointments and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, he does most of it, as well as work.
And so what has changed for you with having had the diagnosis? What?
So I can now recognise that it is my ADHD brain that is struggling with this. Rather than thinking, oh, I've got a whole day off. Now I can do this, that, and that, and I've got this whole day to do everything that I've been waiting to do. Why am I still sat on the sofa watching telly with a nice drink 2 hours into my day? Why can I not get off the sofa and do it? It's because it's too overwhelming. All of the things are too overwhelming. So yes, I'll write 2 or 3 emails. I will advertise a class and feel like, I've ticked a couple of to-do boxes, but what I should be doing with that time is just not happening. So now I know that my brain needs to be told what to do all of the time. So I will make a list of the minutest things that need doing. So instead of having 3 or 4 big things on there, I will make a big list of all the little things that need doing. Literally clear up the mess on the coffee table. Rather than clean the living room, it will be clean the coffee table.
Very specific.
Be really specific.
Yeah.
I will also set myself timers. So if I decide to have some downtime and I will be scrolling Instagram or whatever, I will set a time of 15 minutes because all I need to switch off and then I can go back to it. So timers is a new thing. Yeah. Having my children and Rob remind me of what I said I'm going to do, either by text or by yelling at me. That's really helpful. I mean, one example is one of my children were off school ill. I went to see them and they said, can you get me a headache pill? And I was like, yeah. So I left the room to get a headache pill. Half an hour later, I got a text saying, Mummy, can you please bring me my pill? Okay, I got distracted by the laundry, the cat wanting to go out, taking the bin out, whatever it was. By the time I'd left the room to get to the kitchen, I'd forgotten what I was supposed to do. So they also know that I need reminders. So they'll do that. They'll send me texts. They'll yell at me, remember to go and pick up so-and-so. So
that shows the importance of having, as you say, good family and friends and things around you, and how much difference having those supports around you and them being aware of what you need as well. I guess it's that having those open communications that they understand as well.
Yeah, and it's talking yourself out of what you know is happening now because that's your ADHD brain. Mm-hmm. I mean, the memes and things you see on Instagram and Facebook are hilarious, but they're also so true. You're like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that was a thing. So when you become more aware of what you're doing or not doing, you can note it and then deal with it. So the reason I'm not able to do this is because my brain is overwhelmed with the amount I have to do. Okay, so let's bring it down to a smaller thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
There are so many strategies, and there are ADHD coaches specifically to help people with their ADHD. But there is medication.
Makes sense.
Yeah. But I think the starting points for yourself and your children can be an hour's interview, a 2 hours interview with a psychotherapist who specialises in ADHD, to just give you the starting point. And then, as I said, then research the hell out of it. And then start making a list of the behaviours that your child or you display that relate to that list. Yeah. And then go to your child's teacher and say, I suspect that my child might have this. I recognise these behaviours. What have you seen in class? Okay. And then from there, you can go to what can we do to support them? What measures do you have in place in school to support them? And that's where I am now with my child.
Yeah. Because I think it's that thing of having, as you say, of having conversations in different kind of environments, isn't it? And seeing, having the teacher kind of be on side, I think is probably really important when it comes to childhood ADHD, so that you can kind of see what their behaviour's like whenever they're not with you as well.
Yeah. And this is the thing with adult ADHD. It's not adult ADHD. It's you've always had ADHD. You just didn't know. Yeah. So it's not symptoms that have suddenly come on. So your psychotherapist will ask you what kind of student you were and what were you like in school. What did your parents say about you? If your parent was going to tell you a story about you, what would they say? Okay. Yeah. And the ones that come to the top of my head were all about being impulsive and never sitting still and being very chatty, as I am now. And getting on with everybody, being a real people person, being able to chat to anybody, make everyone feel at ease. There's just pros and cons. Yeah, I was the quiet child in class because I was too worried about what I was going to say was wrong. And there's so many behaviours in school that you can see that were your ADHD behaviours, and you can track through your jobs. Perhaps you didn't do as well in A levels as you should have, because the structure had gone a little bit.
Yeah.
And perhaps you didn't get the promotion you should have because you missed deadlines or whatever it is. You can trace it all back to it. But, like I say, don't self-diagnose. Do get it confirmed. And the wait list for private practice is not as long as NHS. So I paid just under £100 an hour for mine,
which is actually quite good.
Really quite reasonable. Not everybody will be able to do that, but if you can't do it, still go to the school if it's with regards to your child, and talk to them about your concerns, because there's so many resources and proper research medical papers online. It doesn't have to be all anecdotal and memey and funny things. There's really good research online that you can tap into, and there's loads of self-assessments.
And have you found a particular maybe online resource that's particularly helpful that you would recommend?
Yeah, and I can.
Or is there several? You
like.
Can share them. Yeah, no, that'd be really helpful.
And they were very different ones. So I don't really tick the hyperactivity box. I really don't. But I do check the inattentive box very highly. Okay. So there's different types of ADHD as well. And lots of things can be associated with ADHD, like dyspraxia, dyslexia, OCD, all these other things. And you might say that everybody must have a thing, but maybe we do. And some of us are less aware of it than others. And obviously, the other thing is, I was going to say, it is a massive scale. Okay. Yeah. And I think I'm quite mild on the scale because my life has been quite straightforward. As we said beforehand, I haven't suffered any significant trauma. I did have postnatal depression, which could be related, particularly from an anxiety point of view. Mine came from postnatal anxiety. I lost my train of thought again.
Well, we were talking about that sort of spectrum, isn't there? There is a bit of a spectrum and a bit of a scale in there. And as you say, you're kind of at that milder end. And I do think there is something, I don't know if this is not the right forum, but I feel for people who are maybe at the other end of that spectrum, that 3 years is not acceptable. And there's a little bit of banging of drums that I think that we, I'm very supportive of, because there are medication is really helpful. And as you have pointed out, for certain people, particularly children, and particularly at the not so mild end. And 3 years is not acceptable. And I think I sit in this world where the NHS is trying its best, and for a spell, and again, I want to maybe double check on this, they were picking up some private services that the NHS would fund if it was obvious in your area that you were going to have to wait a long time for an assessment. And sometimes that is a possibility. So, it's worth kind of just, as you say, researching the hell out of it and seeing what the services are like in your area and not giving up, I think would be a message I would give in this sort of forum as well. I think you're agreeing, aren't you?
Massively underdiagnosed.
Yeah.
Particularly in girls, because I think they're just quiet and get on with it.
Well, there's a lot of evidence to say it's underdiagnosed in girls.
Yeah.
It's missed.
One of the statistics I saw was that 1 in 20 children in Australia are diagnosed with it, whereas it's 1 in 10 in the UK. So it's like they're obviously diagnosing more, right? It doesn't mean that all Australian children have it. It means that the process of diagnosing them is better.
Yeah.
And it's just children to recognise their differences and strengths, right?
Yeah, that doesn't have to be a negative thing.
It needs to be a positive, and that's how we've treated my family, because other people might find me really difficult, but I'm really good with where I am.
Yeah, and there's so many strengths, you know, as you say, of your personality and that kind of thing, of people finding you approachable and you having that empathy and understanding, and so many, you know, bits of your personality which are, we could label them as ADHD, but actually they're Nicola and they're part of who you are, and you know that's why everyone loves you. So you know,
Thank you,
I think
before we go,
yeah.
Say 2 things that have helped my child. Brown noise as a calming sound. You can just Spotify. I love it.
Better than white. So much better.
You can try all the noises. There's pink noise, but brown noise.
Best. Yeah, it's true.
Good for ADHD brains. And I think the ocean, which also makes sense that I crave being by the ocean. It's those kind of loud crashing Atlantic waves, or Pacific waves that you hear, and also you can get noise cancelling earplugs. So if noise is too much of a distraction, I mean, to the point where, you know, where they can't concentrate in class or they can't enjoy their meal because they're hypersensitive to certain sounds, earplugs and things like that are useful. There's all sorts of little things we can do to help them.
Brilliant.
And ourselves if we need, as adults. But I'm so open to being direct messaged for questions.
Right.
And obviously I could talk about it for days because it's my
well, we said whenever you contacted me to say about maybe we could do this, that it was never going to be able to be just a 15-minute kind of conversation. So I think we can definitely kind of revisit this. I'm sure there'll be questions that'll come afterwards. Please feel free to message me and I can pass them on to Nicola, or direct message Nicola herself. Thank you so much for coming on. As I say, I don't think this is the end of the conversation, but hopefully it's maybe given some people listening just some hope, I guess, and that feeling of, you know, it's worth progressing and thinking about, and it's not all negative. There are some positives in there around the diagnosis, both for them and their children.
Exactly. So, could it be ADHD? Because it's not what you typically think it is. So if your child is struggling at home or at school with certain behaviours or surroundings, it's sensitivity to clothing and certain foods and certain textures. It's so much more than what you think ADHD is if you don't know much about it. Look at it as a possibility. And research it.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nicola. Thanks for listening, everybody. And hopefully see you soon.
Thank you.